He threw her out pregnant. Years later, she returned as the doctor who would save his daughter. Before we dive into this incredible story of redemption and second chances, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And let me know in the comments what state you're watching from. Your support means everything to this channel. Now let's discover how a moment of cruelty would come full circle in the most unexpected way. The rain hammered against the windows of the Thompson mansion as 22-year-old Sarah Mitchell stood in the marble foyer, her hands trembling as she clutched the positive pregnancy test. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times, how she would tell Richard Thompson, the 40-year-old tech mogul she'd been seeing for 8 months, about the baby growing inside her. Richard emerged from his home office, his expensive suit impeccable as always, his steel gray eyes immediately focusing on the small plastic device in her shaking hands. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, Sarah's heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Richard, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't." His voice cut through the air like ice. He didn't even need to see the test to understand. The disgust on his face was immediate and absolute. "Don't even think about what you're about to say." Sarah's world tilted. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They had talked about the future, vacations in Europe, maybe moving in together. She had believed foolishly that love was growing between them. "But Richard, we can figure this out together. I know it's unexpected, but together?" He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Sarah, you're a waitress from the wrong side of town. Did you really think this was going somewhere?" He gestured around the opulent room, at the crystal chandeliers and imported artwork. "This is my world. You were just entertainment." The words hit her like physical blows. Sarah felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to stay standing. "I thought you cared about me." "Care?" Richard's expression grew even colder. "I made it clear from the beginning what this was. If you're pregnant, that's your problem to solve. And if you think you can trap me with some sob story about a baby..." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You're more naive than I thought." Sarah's hands instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. "This is your child too. Prove it." The challenge hung in the air like poison. "And even if it is, I want nothing to do with either of you." He walked to the front door and opened it wide, the storm outside immediately filling the foyer with cold, wet air. "Get out now! Richard, please, security!" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the mansion. 2 large men in suits appeared almost instantly, their faces professionally blank. "Escort Miss Mitchell off the property, and make sure she understands she's not welcome back." As the security guards flanked her, Sarah felt something break inside her chest. This man she had given her heart to, who had whispered sweet words during intimate moments, was throwing her away like garbage. The rain soaked through her thin jacket as she was escorted to her battered Honda Civic, her dreams drowning in the storm. But as she sat in her car, watching the mansion's gates close behind her, Sarah made a promise to herself and to the child growing within her. She would survive this. She would build something beautiful from this devastation, and someday Richard Thompson would regret the cruelest decision he ever made. The engine sputtered to life, and Sarah drove away into the darkness, not knowing that fate was already spinning the threads that would bring her back to this very doorstep, under circumstances none of them could imagine. 8 years had transformed Sarah Mitchell into Dr. Sarah Collins, but the journey had been forged in fire and determination. Standing in the pediatric wing of St. Mary's Children's Hospital, she adjusted her white coat and checked her watch. Another 16-hour shift was beginning, but she had long ago made peace with exhaustion. The first years after that devastating night had been the hardest test of her life. Pregnant, alone, and with barely enough money for rent, Sarah had moved into a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. The constant smell of detergent and the rumble of washing machines became the soundtrack to her pregnancy. Working double shifts at the diner while her belly grew had been humiliating. Customers making snide comments about the unmarried waitress. Her supervisor reducing her hours as she became more visibly pregnant. But Sarah had endured it all with a fierce protectiveness over her unborn child. Emma had been born on a snowy February morning, screaming her lungs out and gripping Sarah's finger with surprising strength. In that moment, looking into her daughter's dark eyes that unfortunately reminded her so much of Richard, Sarah had made an unbreakable vow. Emma would have everything Sarah never did: love, stability, and opportunities. The next years blurred together in a haze of night classes, studying while Emma slept, working multiple jobs to pay for babysitters and textbooks. Sarah's hands, once soft from her brief life of luxury with Richard, became calloused from cleaning offices at night and serving food during the day. Pre-med classes at the local community college led to a scholarship at State University. Sarah graduated summa cum laude, while Emma learned to walk in the university library between study sessions. Medical school came next. 4 years of brutal competition and sleepless nights, with Emma growing up in hospital waiting rooms and medical school lounges. "Mommy, why do you always smell like that cleaning stuff?" 5-year-old Emma had asked one evening, wrinkling her nose as Sarah collapsed onto their second-hand couch after another night of janitorial work. "Because Mommy is working hard to become a doctor," Sarah had explained, pulling her daughter close. "Someday I'm going to help sick children get better. Just like if you ever get sick, I'll know exactly how to take care of you." Emma had smiled then, her gap-toothed grin lighting up their cramped apartment. "Will you be the best doctor ever?" "I'll be the best doctor I can be," Sarah had promised, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Residency had been the final test. 80-hour weeks in pediatric wards, learning to save children's lives while barely seeing her own daughter. Emma stayed with Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who had become like a grandmother to them both. The woman never asked for much money and always had homemade cookies ready when Sarah stumbled home at midnight. Now, 8 years later, Dr. Sarah Collins was one of the most respected pediatric cardiologists in the state. She had published research papers, saved countless young lives, and built a reputation for taking on the most difficult cases. Her penthouse apartment overlooked the city. Emma attended private school, and they traveled every summer to places Sarah had once only dreamed of seeing. But success hadn't erased the memory of that rainy night. Sometimes, in quiet moments between surgeries, Sarah would remember the feel of marble under her feet and the sound of gates closing behind her. She wondered if Richard Thompson ever thought about the child he had rejected, if he ever regretted his cruelty. She was about to find out that some questions are answered in the most unexpected ways. The call came at a.m., piercing through Dr. Sarah Collins's sleep like a blade. She rolled over in her king-size bed, immediately alert. Years of medical training had conditioned her to wake instantly when the hospital needed her. "Dr. Collins, we have an emergency," the voice of Dr. Martinez, the chief of pediatric emergency, crackled through the phone. 8-year-old girl, acute cardiac episode. "The family is requesting you specifically. Apparently they heard about your reputation with complex cases." Sarah was already reaching for her clothes. "What's the presentation?" "Severe chest pain, irregular heartbeat, difficulty breathing." She collapsed at home. "The preliminary EKG is showing some concerning patterns, but we need your expertise to determine if this requires immediate surgical intervention. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sarah ended the call and moved with practiced efficiency. The next room, Emma slept peacefully, her breathing steady and calm. Mrs. Rodriguez, now living in their guest room as Emma's full-time caretaker, peered in the doorway in her robe. "Another emergency, mija?" the older woman asked softly. "A little girl needs help," Sarah replied, kissing Emma's forehead gently. "I'll be back as soon as I can." The drive to St. Mary's was eerily quiet, the city streets empty except for the occasional police car or ambulance. Sarah used the time to mentally prepare, running through diagnostic possibilities and surgical procedures. 8 years old, the same age as Emma. Every case involving a child hit differently now that she was a mother herself. The hospital's emergency entrance was blazing with lights as Sarah parked. She moved quickly through the corridors, her heels clicking against the polished floors, white coat flowing behind her like a cape of competence and authority. "Room 312, Dr. Martinez called out as she approached the pediatric wing. "The family is, well, they're extremely wealthy and demanding the absolute best care. The father has been making calls to hospital administrators all night. Something cold settled in Sarah's stomach, but she pushed the feeling aside. Wealthy families often behaved this way during medical crises. Desperation made people act in ways they normally wouldn't. She paused outside room 312 to review the preliminary chart. Emma Thompson, age 8. The name hit her like a physical blow, but she told herself it was just coincidence. Thompson was a common enough surname. But as Sarah pushed open the door and stepped into the room, time seemed to freeze completely. There, pacing frantically beside the hospital bed, was Richard Thompson, older now, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, worry lines creasing his face in ways that made him look almost human. He was holding the hand of a small girl with dark hair and familiar eyes. Eyes that looked exactly like Emma's, exactly like his own. The little girl on the bed was clearly his daughter. And if Sarah's mental calculations were correct, if this child was 8 years old, then she had been born around the same time as Emma. The timing was impossible to ignore. Richard looked up as she entered, his eyes widening in shock and recognition. The color drained from his face as if he had seen a ghost. For a moment, neither of them could speak, the weight of 8 years and 1,000 unspoken words filling the space between them. "Hello, Richard?" Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "I'm Dr. Collins. I understand your daughter needs cardiac evaluation." The little girl on the bed turned her head weakly towards Sarah's voice, and the resemblance was so striking it took Sarah's breath away. This child could have been Emma's twin sister. The same dark eyes, the same delicate features, even the same stubborn set to her jaw. Richard's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his usual commanding presence completely shattered. The man who had once thrown her out into a storm like she was nothing was now standing helplessly beside a hospital bed, completely at the mercy of the woman he had destroyed. And Sarah realized that after 8 years of wondering, fate had finally decided to show her exactly what revenge looked like. The silence in room 312 stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Richard Thompson stared at Dr. Sarah Collins as if she were an apparition conjured from his darkest memories. His daughter Emma, named after his late mother, though he could never have imagined the cruel irony, lay pale and frightened on the hospital bed between them. "Daddy?" The little girl whispered, her voice weak but confused by the sudden tension in the room. "Is this the doctor who's going to help me?" Richard's jaw worked soundlessly. 8 years had changed Sarah dramatically. Gone was the uncertain young waitress with nervous hands and thrift store clothes. This woman standing before him radiated confidence and authority. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, her white coat pristine, her presence commanding immediate respect. But her eyes, those green eyes that had once looked at him with such trust and love, now they held something that made his blood run cold. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, moving to the child's bedside with professional grace. She carefully avoided looking at Richard directly. "I'm Dr. Collins, and I specialize in helping hearts work better. Can you tell me how you're feeling right now?" Little Emma's face scrunched in concentration. "My chest hurts really bad and it's hard to breathe. Daddy says I'm going to be okay, but he looks scared." Sarah glanced at Richard then, and he flinched at the arctic coldness in her gaze. "Parents often worry when their children are sick," she said diplomatically. "But that's why I'm here, to figure out exactly what's happening and how we can make you feel better." As Sarah began her preliminary examination, Richard found his voice. "Sarah, Dr. Collins," she corrected sharply, not looking up from checking his daughter's pulse. "And right now your daughter is my only concern." The rebuke hit him like a slap. Richard had grown accustomed to deference, to people eager to please him because of his wealth and influence. No one had spoken to him with such dismissive authority in years. "Dr. Collins," he corrected himself, his voice hoarse. How is this possible? You're a doctor?" Sarah's hand stilled for a moment on the stethoscope. When she looked up, her smile was razor sharp. "Surprised? Did you think I spent the last 8 years pining away in some trailer park?" She returned to her examination, her movements efficient and sure. "People have a remarkable capacity to overcome the cruelest circumstances, Mr. Thompson. They can even transform them into strength." Richard's face paled further. The way she said Mr. Thompson, so formal, so distant, made it clear that whatever had existed between them was deader than stone. Little Emma watched the exchange with wide, intelligent eyes. "Do you know my daddy?" she asked Sarah innocently. The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Sarah's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she adjusted the child's blanket. "We knew each other a long time ago," she said carefully. "Before you were born, were you friends?" Richard made a strangled sound. Sarah's smile grew even sharper. "Your father and I had a very brief acquaintance. Nothing more." But as Sarah continued her examination, Richard noticed something that made his already churning stomach drop even further. When little Emma smiled, really smiled, not the wan expression she'd managed since arriving at the hospital, she looked exactly like someone else. Someone he had tried very hard to forget. "Dr. Collins," he said urgently, "I need to speak with you privately." "After I complete my evaluation," Sarah replied coolly. "Your daughter's health is the priority here. Please." Richard's voice cracked slightly. "There are things I need to ask you." Sarah finally looked at him directly, and Richard saw something flicker in her eyes. Not forgiveness, but perhaps acknowledgement that they were no longer the same people who had faced each other in his mansion 8 years ago. "Very well," she said. "But first, let me tell you what I've found." She turned to little Emma with a reassuring smile. "Sweetheart, you're going to need some tests to help me see exactly what's happening with your heart. It might seem scary, but I promise I'll be with you through everything." The little girl nodded bravely, and Richard felt his world tilting on its axis, because in that moment he saw exactly what Sarah must see every time she looked at this child, a mirror image of strength and determination. That could only have come from one source. The woman he had thrown away like garbage had not only survived, she had become the one person who could save the daughter. He never knew he had lost the right to protect. The hospital conference room felt smaller than its actual size as Sarah closed the door behind them. Richard stood by the window overlooking the city, his shoulders rigid with tension. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face, making him look older than his 48 years. "The tests confirm what I suspected," Sarah began, her voice clinically professional. "Your daughter has a rare congenital heart condition, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's serious but treatable with immediate surgical intervention." Richard turned from the window, relief and fear warring in his expression. "Thank God you were here. When they said you were the best pediatric cardiologist in the state, I never imagined." He trailed off, unable to finish. "That the woman you discarded like trash had become someone whose skills you desperately need?" Sarah's voice was silk over steel. "Yes, I imagine that must be quite the shock." "Sarah, please don't." She held up a hand. Her wedding ring, a simple band she wore to avoid unwanted attention, though she had never married, catching the light. "Before we discuss your daughter's surgery, there's something you need to know." Richard's face went ashen. He had been dreading this conversation since the moment she walked into that hospital room. Sarah moved to the conference table and pulled out her phone. With deliberate slowness, she scrolled through her photos until she found the one she wanted. She turned the screen toward Richard, and he nearly collapsed. It was a picture of a little girl with dark hair and familiar eyes, standing in a soccer uniform with a trophy in her hands. She looked exactly like the child lying in the hospital bed 3 floors below. "Her name is Emma, too," Sarah said quietly. "Emma Collins. She's 8 years old, born 9 months after you threw me out of your house." She set the phone down between them like evidence in a trial. "She's your daughter, Richard. The child you told me to prove existed." Richard sank into a chair as if his legs could no longer support him. "My God," he whispered. All this time you've had 2 daughters," Sarah continued relentlessly. "One you raised in luxury and privilege, one you condemned to poverty and struggle. One you know and love, one whose existence you denied." "I didn't know," Richard said desperately. "Sarah, you have to believe me. If I had known, you didn't want to know." Her voice cut through his protests like a scalpel. "You made it very clear that night that any child I might be carrying was my problem to solve. Well, I solved it. I raised our daughter to be strong, intelligent, and kind. Everything you're not." Richard's hands shook as he stared at the photo. "She's beautiful. She looks like the daughter lying in that hospital bed. Yes, they're half-sisters, Richard. Your genetic legacy is lying in two different beds right now. One fighting for her life, one safe at home, sleeping peacefully. I want to meet her, Richard said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. Emma, our Emma. I want to know her to make up for lost time. No! Sarah's voice was thunder in the small room. She snatched the phone back, as if protecting her daughter's image from his gaze. You lost that right 8 years ago when you chose cruelty over responsibility. But she's my daughter too. She's my daughter. I was there for her first steps, her first words, her first day of school. I held her when she had nightmares and taught her to ride a bike. You were nothing to her because you chose to be nothing. Richard buried his face in his hands. I was terrified, he admitted. I was 40 years old, set in my ways, and the thought of a child, it scared me. I handled it badly. Badly? Sarah laughed bitterly. Richard, you destroyed a 22-year-old girl's life because you were scared. Do you have any idea what the next few years were like for me? Working 3 jobs while pregnant, studying for medical school while my daughter played on library floors, cleaning office buildings at night while she slept in daycare centers. Let me make it right, he pleaded. Let me help now. Both girls. I can provide for both of them, give them everything they need. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. Your daughter in that hospital bed needs surgery within the next 6 hours, or her condition will worsen rapidly. I am the only surgeon in this hospital qualified to perform the specific procedure she requires. Richard's eyes widened as he understood the implications. You're going to operate on her? Of course I am. Despite what you did to me, despite the pain you caused, I would never let a child suffer because of the sins of her father. Sarah moved toward the door, then paused. That little girl is innocent in all of this. She doesn't deserve to pay for your cruelties. And after the surgery? Sarah's smile was sad and final. After the surgery, you go back to your life and I go back to mine. Your daughter will be healthy and whole, and you can pretend this conversation never happened, just like you pretended my pregnancy never happened 8 years ago. As she reached for the door handle, Richard called out desperately, What can I do? How can I make amends? Sarah turned back one last time, and for just a moment, he saw not the accomplished doctor but the broken young woman he had cast aside. You can live with the knowledge that the woman you destroyed became the one who saved your child. And you can pray that someday, somehow, the universe forgives you for the choices you made. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Richard alone with the weight of his failures and the knowledge that redemption sometimes comes at the highest possible price. The operating room at St. Mary's Children's Hospital hummed with focused intensity as Dr. Sarah Collins prepared for the most emotionally challenging surgery of her career. Through the observation window, she could see Richard Thompson pacing in the family waiting area, his usual commanding presence reduced to that of any other terrified parent. Dr. Collins, her surgical resident, approached with the final pre-op reports. The patient is prepped and ready. Her vitals are stable, though her condition is critical. Sarah nodded, washing her hands with methodical precision. 8 years of medical training and countless surgeries had prepared her for this moment. But nothing could have prepared her for the emotional complexity of operating on Richard's daughter, her daughter's half-sister. As she entered the OR, little Emma Thompson looked so small on the surgical table. Her dark hair tucked under a surgical cap, her face peaceful under anesthesia. Sarah felt her heart clench. This child was innocent of her father's sins, deserving of every chance at a full, healthy life. Let's begin, Sarah announced to her team. And the 3-hour procedure commenced. Every cut was precise, every suture perfect. Sarah had performed this surgery dozens of times, but never with such personal investment. As she worked to repair the child's heart, she thought about her own Emma at home, probably dreaming about her upcoming school play or the puppy she'd been begging for. 2 hours in, complications arose. The child's heart wasn't responding as expected to the repair. Sarah's team exchanged worried glances as the monitors showed irregular patterns. Dr. Collins. The anesthesiologist's voice held concern. Sarah's hands never wavered. She had not become one of the country's top pediatric cardiologists by giving up when things got difficult. "We're going to try a different approach," she announced calmly. "This little girl is going home healthy. Another hour of delicate work, adjustments, and careful monitoring." Finally, beautifully, the child's heart began beating in strong, steady rhythm. The monitors showed patterns that made the entire surgical team smile behind their masks. "Excellent work, Dr. Collins," her chief resident said as they began closing. That was brilliant surgical technique. But Sarah was thinking about something else entirely. As she watched little Emma's chest rise and fall with healthy, steady breaths, she realized that healing wasn't just happening on the surgical table. In the recovery room, as little Emma slowly awakened, Sarah sat beside her bed. The child's eyes fluttered open, confused but alert. "Hi there, brave girl," Sarah said softly. "You did wonderfully. Your heart is all fixed now, Dr. Collins." The little voice was hoarse from the breathing tube. "Did it work? Am I going to be okay?" "You're going to be more than okay. You're going to be able to run and play and do everything other children do." Sarah smoothed the hair from the child's forehead with unexpected tenderness. "Your daddy is very worried about you. Would you like me to bring him in?" Little Emma nodded weakly, and Sarah stepped out to the waiting area. Richard looked like he had aged years in the past few hours. When he saw her emerge from recovery, he jumped to his feet. "How is she?" "The surgery was successful. She's awake and asking for you." Sarah's voice was professional, but Richard caught something softer in her expression. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "I know what this cost you emotionally. I know you could have refused. I told you, I would never let a child suffer for her parents' mistakes." Sarah paused, then added quietly, "She's a lovely little girl, Richard. She has your stubbornness but also genuine kindness. Whatever else you've done wrong, you've raised her to be a good person." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah, I know I have no right to ask this, but could I see her?" "Your Emma, just once. I don't want to disrupt her life, but I need to know the daughter I threw away." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "My Emma doesn't know about you. She believes her father was someone who died before she was born. That story has given her peace, I understand, but..." Sarah surprised herself by continuing. "She's performing in her school play next Friday. Lincoln Elementary, 7 p.m. It's a public performance." Richard stared at her in disbelief. "You're telling me I can come?" "I'm telling you it's a public venue. What you do with that information is your choice." Sarah's voice grew firm again. "But Richard, if you choose to come, you come as a stranger in the audience. You don't approach her, you don't introduce yourself, and you never tell her who you are without my explicit permission. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear. And one more thing," Sarah met his eyes directly. "If you ever want a chance, and I mean even the slightest possibility of being part of her life, you become a better man than you were 8 years ago. You prove through actions, not words, that you're someone worthy of knowing her." Richard nodded, understanding that he was being given an impossible gift, a second chance he had never earned. As Sarah walked away down the hospital corridor, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 years. The possibility of forgiveness, not for Richard's sake, but for her own. And maybe, just maybe, for the sake of 2 little girls who deserved to know they had a sister. The healing, she realized, was just beginning. Thank you so much for staying with us through this incredible journey of redemption and second chances. Stories like these remind us that our actions have consequences we can never fully predict, but also that healing is always possible when we choose courage over fear. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. And don't forget to comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe Richard deserves a second chance? What would you do in Sarah's position? And until next time, remember that the strongest people are often those who've survived the cruelest storms. See you in the next story.